A retired war nurse spots a dog at a Veterans Day parade. A dog she instantly recognizes as the brave war companion she once risked her life alongside. Overcome with emotion, she calls out to him. But the dog doesn't respond. He doesn't even look at her. How could he have forgotten her after everything they've been through? As she tries to reconnect, she uncovers the heartbreaking truth about his trauma and the new family who depends on him now. Can she win back his trust and help heal his broken spirit? Or will she lose him forever? This is a powerful story of love, redemption, and second chances you won't want to miss. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn breeze carried the distant sound of drums and trumpets as Carol Green pulled her navy cardigan tighter around her shoulders, trying to ward off the morning chill. She hadn't wanted to come to the Veterans Day parade, but something had drawn her here, like a whisper she couldn't quite ignore, an invisible thread tugging at her heart. The small-town Main Street was lined with American flags that fluttered against the bright morning sky, their crisp red and white stripes dancing in the wind. Carol watched families wave and cheer as veterans marched past in perfect formation, their medals gleaming in the sunlight like tiny mirrors. Her own service as a war nurse felt like another lifetime ago, buried beneath layers of civilian routine and carefully constructed normalcy. She stood apart from the crowd, feeling like a stranger in her own hometown, her feet rooted to the sidewalk's edge. Then she saw him. The German shepherd's muscular frame moved with purpose through the crowd, his therapy vest clearly visible against his thick black and tan coat. Carol's breath caught in her throat, and her heart seemed to skip several beats. Those distinctive markings, the slight tilt of his head, the way he carried himself. She would know him anywhere, even after all these years. Max? The name escaped her lips before she could stop herself, barely more than a whisper. The dog's ears twitched slightly at the sound, but he didn't turn. He continued walking beside a tall man with kind eyes and worry lines around his mouth, focused entirely on his handler as if his life depended on it. Carol's hands trembled as she watched them pass, her fingers unconsciously twisting the hem of her cardigan. She had to know for sure. Weaving through the crowd of spectators, she caught up to them near the courthouse steps, where fallen leaves skittered across the concrete. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice shakier than she'd intended. The man turned, his hand automatically tightening on Max's leash, a protective gesture she recognized all too well. "Yes?" His tone was polite but cautious, like someone used to guarding precious things. "I'm sorry to bother you, but that dog—" Carol struggled to find the right words, her throat suddenly dry. "Is his name Max?" The man nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly. "It is. I'm Ryan Hale." He studied her face carefully, searching for something. "Do you know him?" "I think I do." Carol's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Max, who kept his gaze firmly fixed on the ground, his body tense and still. "I was his handler in Afghanistan. Before." "Before what?" Ryan's expression softened slightly, but wariness remained in his stance, his shoulders squared and protective. "Before I had to leave him behind during a mission gone wrong." The words felt like stones in her throat, each one heavier than the last. "I never knew what happened to him after that. I looked, but—" Ryan shifted his weight, creating a subtle barrier between Carol and Max, a father's instinct to protect. "He's been with us for almost 2 years now. He's my son's therapy dog. Eli's 8 and deals with severe anxiety. They're inseparable." Carol noticed how Max pressed against Ryan's leg, seeking reassurance in a way that made her heart ache. The dog, she remembered, would have been alert, scanning for threats, ready for action. This Max seemed different, more hesitant, as if the world had taught him to be careful. Does he have trouble with loud noises? Carol asked quietly, already knowing the answer. Ryan's eyebrows rose slightly. Yes, actually. The adoption center told us he had some trauma from his military service. He's gotten better, but certain things still trigger him. Fireworks are the worst. Carol nodded, her heart aching with a familiar guilt. Would it be all right if I tried to say hello to him? Just for a moment? Ryan hesitated, looking down at Max's tense posture and slightly tucked tail. I don't know if that's a good idea right now. He gets nervous around strangers, and with all the parade noise. I have to think about what's best for him. Of course, I understand, Carol said quickly, though the rejection stung like salt in an old wound. Maybe another time? In a quieter place? Somewhere he feels safe? Ryan considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. We could arrange that. For Max's sake, it should be somewhere he feels comfortable. Maybe the park where we usually walk him. As they exchanged contact information, Carol caught Max's eye for just a moment. There was a flicker of something there. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. But he quickly looked away again, pressing closer to Ryan's side. Carol's chest tightened as she watched them walk away, Max's tail low and his ears still alert to the parade sounds around them, and she wondered if some wounds could ever truly heal. The next day, Carol arrived at Jefferson Park 15 minutes early, clutching a canvas tote bag that held Max's old favorites. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out the worn tennis ball and bag of beef treats, items she'd kept safe all these years like precious memories. The autumn sun warmed her face as she spotted Ryan and Max near the park's wooden gazebo, their figures casting long shadows across the freshly mowed grass. Thank you for meeting me, Carol said softly, maintaining her distance. Max lay at Ryan's feet, his body stiff and alert, every muscle tense like a coiled spring. His ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but his eyes remained fixed on the ground, studying each blade of grass as if they held secrets. Carol lowered herself to her knees, letting the treats rest in her open palm. Hey, buddy, she whispered, fighting to keep her voice steady. Remember these? You used to go crazy for them in Afghanistan. Would practically turn somersaults for just one bite. Max's nose lifted slightly, catching the familiar scent, but he pressed himself closer to Ryan's legs, seeking comfort in the familiar. Ryan watched carefully, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity, one hand resting protectively on Max's collar. Maybe give him a little space, Ryan suggested as Carol inched forward. She nodded and settled back, her heart aching at the distance between them. You know, Max, Carol continued, her voice gentle, I remember this one time during a sandstorm. You wouldn't leave my side, even though the wind was howling. You kept nudging my hand, making sure I was okay. Such a brave boy, always watching out for everyone else. Max's ears perked up at her words, and for a moment Carol's heart leapt with hope. But then he turned his head away, looking toward the trees instead, as if searching for an escape route. Ryan shifted his weight, then said, He gets like this sometimes. Last month, during a big thunderstorm, he spent hours hiding under Eli's bed. Wouldn't come out, wouldn't even eat. Just trembled there until morning. Eli stayed with him the whole time, reading stories out loud. Carol's chest tightened, each word another weight on her heart. How long has he been having these episodes? Since we got him, Ryan replied, reaching down to stroke Max's head. The rescue center warned us, but... He paused, watching Max lean into his touch, seeking reassurance. Sometimes I wonder what he went through before finding us. The things that made him this way. Carol swallowed hard, memories of that final day in Afghanistan flooding back like a tidal wave. I understand if he's not ready, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan studied her face for a moment, his expression softening. Look, We could try again. Maybe set up something more structured. Eli's therapist has some experience with trauma and service dogs. She might be able to help. Guide us through this. I'd appreciate that, Carol said, gathering her unopened bag of treats and the unused tennis ball. As she stood, the weight of guilt pressed harder against her chest, threatening to crush her. She watched Max, still avoiding her gaze, and wondered if he remembered her at all. And if he did, whether each glance away was his way of saying he hadn't forgiven her for leaving him behind in that dusty, war-torn place so many years ago. Carol sat in her dimly lit living room, the only light coming from a small table lamp beside her worn leather armchair. Its soft glow cast long shadows across the hardwood floor. In her hands, she held a creased photograph, its edges softened from years of handling. The image showed her unit in Afghanistan, with Max sitting proudly beside her, his ears perked and alert, his brown eyes focused on something beyond the camera's lens. Her fingers traced Max's outline in the photo, lingering on the distinctive white patch on his chest. The memories came rushing back, sharp and painful, like shards of glass beneath her skin. The day had started like any other. A routine patrol through a small village, the morning sun already beating down on their shoulders. Then came the crack of gunfire, the shouts of her fellow soldiers, and the chaos that followed, turning their ordinary morning into a nightmare. "Get the wounded out now!" The commander's voice still echoed in her head, as clear as if he were standing beside her. She remembered Max's leash slipping from her grasp as she rushed to help carry injured soldiers to the evacuation helicopter, her medical training taking over despite her racing heart. The last glimpse she had of him was his confused expression as he disappeared into the smoke and dust, his tail lowered in uncertainty. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to the photograph, her voice catching in her throat. "I had no choice." The words felt hollow, even after all these years. The next morning, Carol paced her kitchen, phone in hand, her coffee growing cold on the counter. After 3 attempts, she finally dialed Ryan's number, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed the buttons. "Ryan? It's Carol Green." She took a deep breath, steadying herself against the kitchen counter. "I know yesterday didn't go well, but I'd like another chance to work with Max. Please." There was a long pause before Ryan responded, agreeing, but with clear hesitation in his voice. "You can come by the house, but don't expect too much. Max needs time to adjust to new people." 2 hours later, Carol stood in Ryan's modest living room. Family photos lined the walls, showing Eli's growth through the years, and children's toys were scattered across the floor like colorful islands. Max lay on a plush dog bed near the couch, where 8-year-old Eli sat doing homework, his legs swinging rhythmically beneath the coffee table. Suddenly, Eli's pencil snapped with a sharp crack, and his breathing quickened, his small shoulders tensing. Before anyone could react, Max was already by his side, pressing his body against the boy's legs, his presence steady and calming. Carol watched in amazement as Eli's fingers wound into Max's fur, his panic subsiding almost immediately under the dog's watchful care. "He always knows," Ryan said quietly, standing beside Carol, pride and gratitude mixing in his voice. "He's been Eli's anchor since his mom left. I don't know how we'd manage without him." Carol nodded, fighting back tears as she watched the gentle interaction between boy and dog. This was a different Max from the military dog she'd known, still protective, but in a softer way, his warrior's heart now devoted to guarding this small family. When she took a step toward them, Max's head snapped up, his muscles tensing. He let out a low whine and backed away, positioning himself behind Eli's legs, his eyes never leaving Carol's face. The rejection felt like a physical blow. But Carol squared her shoulders, drawing on years of military discipline to maintain her composure. As she watched Max return his attention to Eli, gently nudging the boy's hand with his nose, she began mentally listing ways she might rebuild their connection. She'd start small, maybe sitting quietly in the same room, letting Max get used to her presence again, allowing him to approach on his own terms. Carol gathered her things to leave, her heart heavy but her resolve stronger than ever. She had to find a way to make this right. She owed Max that much. Some bonds she knew were worth fighting for, no matter how long it took to restore them. The community center's small activity room felt cozy and safe, with soft morning light filtering through the windows and casting warm patterns on the pale blue walls. Carol had arranged cushions in a circle and carefully laid out items from her past with Max. His old training toy, worn and loved at the edges, a leather collar that had softened with age and use, and most importantly, the sand-colored scarf she'd worn during their service together in Afghanistan. Max entered the room cautiously, his nails clicking softly on the polished floor. Ryan held his leash loosely in one hand, watching with a mix of hope and concern etched across his tired face. Carol sat quietly on one of the cushions, her hands folded in her lap, letting Max take his time to explore the space. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, her voice gentle as a summer breeze. "Take all the time you need." Max circled the room twice, his movements precise and measured, before his nose twitched, catching a familiar scent. He paused mid-step, his ears perking up slightly as he looked at the scarf. Step by step, he moved closer until his nose nearly touched the fabric, his whiskers trembling with each careful breath. Carol held her breath as he took a long, deliberate sniff. "That's the first time I've seen him show interest in anything from his past," Ryan said softly, running a hand through his disheveled hair. His shoulders slumped as he sat down heavily on a nearby chair, the weight of his worries visible in every movement. Carol noticed the dark circles under his eyes and the way his shirt collar was slightly askew. "Ryan, is everything okay?" He let out a heavy sigh that seemed to come from deep within. "Not really. I've been meaning to talk to you about something." He glanced at Max, who was still investigating the scarf with careful attention. "I've gotten an offer for Max. A wealthy family in the next town. Their daughter needs a therapy dog. They've been very persistent." Carol's heart dropped like a stone in still water. "You're thinking of selling him?" "I don't want to," Ryan's voice cracked with emotion. "But Eli's medical bills keep piling up. His anxiety medication, the therapy sessions, the specialists." He pulled out his worn leather wallet and showed her a stack of overdue notices, the red stamps glaring accusingly. "The money they're offering would cover everything, plus give us a safety net for the future." "But Max and Eli are so close," Carol protested, her chest tightening at the thought. "It would devastate him. That dog is his whole world." "Don't you think I know that?" Ryan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "But what kind of father would I be if I can't provide proper medical care for my son? Sometimes we have to make impossible choices, even when they break our hearts." Carol watched as Max finally lay down next to the scarf, his body more relaxed than she'd seen since their reunion, his chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. The sight strengthened her resolve. She couldn't let this family be torn apart. Not when she might be able to help. Not when they'd all come so far together. "Give me some time," she said firmly, her mind already racing with possibilities. "There has to be another way. We'll find it together." Ryan shook his head, his expression a mixture of gratitude and resignation. "I appreciate that, Carol, but this isn't your problem to solve. You've already done so much." "Maybe not," she replied, watching Max's tail thump gently against the floor in a steady, hopeful rhythm. "But I'm making it mine. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the easiest, but that doesn't make it any less right." The morning sun streamed through Ryan's kitchen window, but the warmth couldn't pierce the chill that had settled over the room. Ryan gripped his phone tightly, his knuckles white as Vanessa's voice crackled through the speaker. "You can barely keep up with the bills, Ryan. How is that providing a stable environment for our son?" Vanessa's words cut sharp and clear. "I'm doing everything I can," Ryan said, trying to keep his voice steady. He glanced toward the living room where Eli was reading, Max curled protectively at his feet. "Well, it's not enough. I'm talking to my lawyer about full custody," Vanessa declared. "Eli needs—" The doorbell rang, interrupting the conversation. Carol stood on the porch, her usual warm smile fading as she caught sight of Ryan's distressed expression through the window. He waved her in, still clutching the phone. "We'll discuss this later," Ryan said firmly, ending the call. His hands were shaking as he set the phone down. "Is everything all right?" Carol asked quietly, watching as Ryan slumped against the kitchen counter. "No, not really." He ran his fingers through his hair, a gesture Carol had come to recognize as a sign of his anxiety. "That was Vanessa, my ex-wife. She's threatening to take Eli." Carol sat down at the kitchen table, her face etched with concern. "Because of the financial situation?" Ryan nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "She says I can't provide stability. And she's right. I'm drowning here, between Eli's medical bills and basic expenses." He trailed off, watching Max and Eli through the doorway. "Now this offer for Max. I feel like I'm being forced to choose between my son's therapy dog and my son himself." Carol reached across the table, stopping short of touching his arm. "We can find another way. Look how far Max has come already." As if on cue, Max padded into the kitchen, pausing near Carol's chair. She slowly pulled a treat from her pocket and held it out. Max hesitated, then carefully took it from her palm, a small victory that made Carol's heart leap. When she reached to pet him, though, he backed away, retreating to his spot near Eli. "See?" Carol said softly. "He's making progress. Max is crucial to Eli's well-being. We can use that. Show Vanessa how important he is to Eli's therapy." Ryan watched Max settling back beside his son. "You really think we can make this work?" "We have to try," Carol said firmly. "For both of them." As Carol prepared to leave later that morning, she squeezed Ryan's shoulder. "We'll figure this out, Ryan. I promise we'll find a way to keep them all together." Ryan sat down heavily next to Max, burying his face in his hands as the weight of his impossible choice pressed down on him. A few days later, Carol pulled into Ryan's driveway, her heart lifting at the sound of childish laughter from the backyard. She walked around the house to find Eli sitting cross-legged in a small blue tent, Max lying beside him with his head on the boy's lap. "And then the brave knight saved the whole kingdom," Eli read from his book, one hand absently stroking Max's fur. The German shepherd's eyes were fixed on Eli's face, his tail thumping gently against the grass. "That's quite a nice fort you've got there," Carol said softly, not wanting to startle them. Eli looked up, his initial shyness melting when he recognized her. "It's our safety fort. Dad helped me build it. Max and I come here when things get scary." Carol settled on the grass near them. "Scary things?" "Like thunder," Eli explained, hugging Max closer. "Or when I can't sleep because of the monsters under my bed. But Max checks everything for me, don't you, boy?" The dog licked Eli's cheek, making him giggle. "He sleeps in my room every night," Eli continued. "Sometimes I have bad dreams, but Max always knows. He puts his head on my bed and stays with me until I'm not scared anymore." Carol's heart ached at the pure love in Eli's voice. Before she could respond, the crunch of tires on gravel broke the peaceful moment. A sleek silver car pulled up, and a well-dressed woman stepped out, her heels clicking against the driveway. "Eli," Vanessa called sharply, "get your things. We're leaving." Ryan hurried out of the house. "Vanessa, this isn't your scheduled day." "I had a meeting cancel. I thought I'd spend some extra time with my son." Her eyes narrowed at Carol. "And you are?" "Carol Green. I'm helping with Max." "The dog?" Vanessa cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Ryan, you're still wasting time and money on this? He's just a dog, not a licensed therapist." Eli clutched Max's fur. "He's not just a dog. He's my best friend." "Honey, you need real help, not a pet," Vanessa said. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Ryan. Our son needs professional care, not some animal Band-Aid." "Max is helping him," Carol interjected. "I've seen how they interact." "With all due respect," Vanessa's tone held none, "this isn't any of your business." She turned to Ryan. "Expect a call from my lawyer. This arrangement clearly isn't working." Eli's lower lip trembled as he hugged Max goodbye. The dog whined softly, pressing against the boy's legs. They all watched as Vanessa's car disappeared down the street. Ryan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "We're not giving up," Carol said quietly, watching Max stare after the car. His ears drooped in concern. "We'll figure something out." The morning air was crisp as Carol, Ryan, and Max made their way down the secluded hiking trail. Tall pines swayed gently overhead, creating a peaceful atmosphere perfect for their training session. Carol's hand trembled slightly as she pulled the small metal whistle from her pocket. "This was the whistle I used with Max during our service," she explained to Ryan. "We had a special signal, 2 short bursts followed by a long one." Ryan nodded, keeping a firm grip on Max's leash. The German shepherd stood alert but distant, his ears twitching at every rustle of leaves. Carol took a deep breath and blew the whistle in the familiar pattern. Max's ears perked up, but he remained still. She tried again, this time adding a gentle command. "Max, come." Minutes passed as Carol repeated the pattern. Gradually, Max's rigid posture softened. His head tilted to one side, studying Carol with growing interest. When she gave the command, "Sit," Max hesitated for a moment before lowering himself to the ground. "That's amazing," Ryan whispered, careful not to break the moment. Carol's eyes welled with tears of joy at this small victory. But before she could respond, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. A group of hikers had rounded the bend, one of them stepping on a large branch. The sound sent Max into a panic. He lurched forward with such force that the leash slipped through Ryan's fingers. In seconds, the dog disappeared into the underbrush, leaving Carol and Ryan calling his name. "This way!" Carol pointed to some disturbed leaves. They followed the trail until they found Max huddled beneath a thick bush, his whole body shaking. Carol dropped to her knees a few feet away from him. "It's okay, boy," she murmured, her voice steady and calm. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." She continued speaking softly, mixing in phrases from their time together in Afghanistan. Slowly, Max's trembling subsided. His eyes met Carol's, and inch by inch, he crawled out from under the bush. "These setbacks are normal," Carol assured Ryan as they walked back to the trail. "What matters is that he made progress today. He remembered some of our training." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, still shaken. "Thank you for finding him so quickly. I can see now why you two had such a strong bond." "We'll get there," Carol said, watching Max walk between them. "He just needs time and patience." The phone's harsh ring cut through the evening quiet. Ryan's face tightened as he answered, listening intently while Carol watched from across the living room. Max lay curled up in his bed nearby, his tail thumping softly against the cushion. "I understand," Ryan said, his voice strained. "Yes, I'll think about it." He hung up and rubbed his temples. "That was Mrs. Henderson," he explained to Carol. "She's offering $50,000 for Max. Says she can pay right away." Carol's stomach dropped. "Ryan, you can't." "I don't want to," he interrupted, his voice cracking. "But do you know what that money could mean? I could pay off Eli's medical bills, maybe even put a down payment on a house instead of renting this place." "There have to be other options," Carol insisted. "What about—" A small gasp from the hallway made them both turn. Eli stood there in his pajamas, eyes wide with fear. "You're selling Max?" His lower lip trembled. "Buddy, it's not—" Ryan started, but Eli had already turned and run down the hall. The sound of his bedroom door slamming echoed through the house. Max lifted his head at the noise, whining softly. "I'll talk to him," Ryan said, starting to stand. But Carol touched his arm. "Give him a minute," she said gently. "Ryan, listen to me. I know you're trying to do what's best for Eli, but Max isn't just a dog to him. He's security, comfort, friendship, everything Eli needs right now." Ryan sank back into his chair. "You think I don't know that? But what kind of father am I if I can't even provide basic stability?" "The kind who puts his son's emotional well-being first," Carol said firmly. "We can figure out the financial stuff. There are programs, resources we haven't looked into yet. But losing Max," she shook her head, "that would devastate him." Ryan looked down at his hands. "I need time to think about this," he said quietly. Carol gathered her things, her heart heavy. At the door, she turned back one last time. "Just don't make any quick decisions, okay?" After she left, Ryan sat in his chair, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Max padded over and laid his head in Ryan's lap, brown eyes looking up trustingly. Ryan scratched behind the dog's ears, listening to the muffled sounds of Eli crying in his room. The morning sun barely touched the windows when a sharp knock echoed through Ryan's house. He opened the door to find Vanessa standing there, her business suit crisp and perfect. Behind her stood a man in an expensive suit holding a leather briefcase. "We need to talk," Vanessa said, brushing past Ryan into the living room. "This is Mr. Phillips, my attorney." Ryan's hands felt cold as he gestured for them to sit. Max padded over to his side, pressing against his leg. "I'll be direct," Vanessa began, her voice like ice. "Your financial situation is unacceptable. The fact that you're relying on a dog for Eli's emotional support instead of proper professional help proves you're not providing the stable environment our son needs." Mr. Phillips opened his briefcase, pulling out some papers. "Mrs. Hale is prepared to file for sole custody," he stated. "Unless," Vanessa cut in, "you sell Max and use that money to get your life in order. It's your choice, Ryan. The dog or your son." Ryan's throat felt tight. "Max is part of Eli's therapy. He needs him." "What Eli needs is a father who can provide for him," Vanessa snapped. "Stop being selfish. This dog could go to a better home, and you know it. It would be for the best." After they left, Ryan sat on his couch, head in his hands. That's how Carol found him when she arrived 20 minutes later. "Ryan, what happened?" He looked up, his eyes red. "Vanessa was here with her lawyer. She's going to take Eli if I don't sell Max." His voice cracked. "Maybe she's right. What kind of father can't even provide properly for his son?" Carol sat beside him. "Don't talk like that. Max isn't just a pet. He's crucial to Eli's well-being. Selling him would hurt Eli more than help him." "But what if keeping him means losing Eli altogether?" Ryan's shoulders slumped. "I feel like such a failure." "You're not a failure," Carol insisted. "You're a father who's fighting for what's best for his son. Max helps Eli in ways no amount of money can replace." Through the window, Carol spotted Eli in the backyard, sitting cross-legged in the grass. Max lay beside him, and Eli's fingers were woven gently through the dog's fur. The sight made her heart ache. Ryan sat on the edge of Eli's bed, smoothing the dinosaur print covers. The night light cast soft shadows across the room as Max settled into his usual spot next to the bed. "Dad?" Eli's voice was small. "Is Mom going to take me away?" Ryan's heart clenched. He ran his fingers through Eli's hair. "No, buddy. I'm not going to let that happen." Eli's lower lip trembled. "Is Max leaving too?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Tears welled up in Eli's eyes. "Please don't let him go, Dad. He helps me be brave." Eli clutched his blanket. "When I'm scared, he knows. He always knows. Nobody else understands like Max does." Ryan pulled Eli into a tight hug, feeling his son's tears dampen his shirt. Max whined softly and pressed his nose against Eli's hand. The next afternoon, sunshine warmed the grass at the local park as Carol watched Eli throw a tennis ball for Max. "Eli," Carol called, patting the bench beside her, "what's your favorite memory with Max?" Eli's face lit up. "Last month during the big storm. I was really scared of the thunder, but Max stayed with me all night. He demonstrated by spreading his arms wide. He made himself big around me like a shield, and I felt safe enough to sleep." Carol noticed Ryan's eyes growing misty. "Ryan," she said softly, "talk to me. What are you afraid of?" Ryan watched Eli playing with Max. "I'm terrified of losing my son," he admitted, his voice rough. "Vanessa knows exactly how to make me doubt myself." Carol placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Listen to me. That ultimatum? It's just a scare tactic. She's counting on your fear to make you give in." She gestured toward Eli and Max. "Look at them. That's worth fighting for." Max trotted over, carrying the tennis ball. For the first time since their reunion, he brushed against Carol's leg as he passed, making her breath catch in surprise. The phone's glow lit up Ryan's face as he stared at the screen, his fingers trembling. The wealthy buyer's latest message showed a number that made his breath catch, enough to cover Eli's therapy for years, with plenty left over. He pressed the phone to his forehead, shoulders slumping under the weight of the decision. Miles away, Carol thrashed in her bed, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. In her dream, she was back in Afghanistan, dust choking the air. Gunfire crackled nearby. "Max, come!" she screamed, but the German Shepherd was pinned down. Her commanding officer yelled for immediate evacuation. She had to choose: stay and risk her entire unit, or leave Max behind. Carol jolted awake, her heart pounding. The guilt felt as fresh as it had years ago. The next morning, Carol drove to Ryan's house, noting his distracted expression as he let her in. His eyes were ringed with dark circles, matching her own sleepless night. "Ryan, what's wrong?" she asked, though she already suspected. He ran his hands through his hair. "They increased the offer for Max. Significantly." His voice cracked. "I hate myself for even considering it. But with Eli's therapy costs and Vanessa's threats—" "There has to be another way," Carol insisted, reaching for his arm. A small gas made them both turn. Eli stood in the doorway, his face pale. Before either adult could speak, he ran upstairs, Max following close behind. The sound of a door slamming echoed through the house. Carol found Eli curled up in his bedroom, arms wrapped around Max's neck. The dog's brown eyes watched her carefully as she sat on the floor nearby. "He helps me breathe when everything feels scary," Eli whispered, his face buried in Max's fur. "When Mom left, I couldn't sleep for weeks. But Max stayed with me every night." He looked up at Carol, tears streaming down his cheeks. "He makes the bad feelings smaller." Carol's throat tightened. "We're going to do everything we can to keep Max here with you, Eli. I promise." Later, as Carol walked to her car, she could hear Eli's words echoing in her mind. She thought about her savings account, her retirement fund, the beach house she'd inherited from her parents. A plan began forming in her mind. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ryan's living room as Vanessa strode in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She clutched a manila envelope in her manicured hands, her expression cold and determined. "These are the custody papers," she announced, thrusting them at Ryan. "I'm giving you one last chance to show you can make responsible decisions for our son." Ryan's hand shook as he took the envelope. "Selling Max isn't what's best for Eli. A stable financial situation is what's best for him," Vanessa countered. "That dog is a luxury No!" Eli's voice rang out from the doorway. His small frame trembled, but his eyes blazed with determination. "Max isn't a luxury. He helps me sleep when I'm scared. He makes the bad feelings go away when everything gets too loud in my head." Tears streamed down Eli's face as he continued, "You don't understand, Mom. You've never tried to understand." Vanessa's perfectly composed expression cracked, her mouth falling open slightly. She took a step back, clearly unprepared for her usually quiet son's outburst. After Vanessa left, Ryan sat heavily on the couch, emotionally exhausted. He watched Eli curled up with Max in the corner, struck by his son's courage. The boy who once struggled to speak up in class had found his voice defending his beloved companion. Later that afternoon, Carol arrived to find Ryan sorting through photos of Eli and Max together. Her heart ached seeing the obvious bond captured in each picture. "I might have a solution," Carol said softly, touching the gold locket around her neck. "This was James's last gift to me before he passed. It's worth quite a bit." Ryan looked up, shaking his head. "Carol, no. I couldn't possibly—" "You can and you will," she insisted, already unfastening the chain. "Some things are worth more than gold. Seeing Max heal, watching him help Eli, that means everything to me." Ryan began organizing the photos, along with letters from Eli's therapist documenting Max's positive impact. "If Vanessa pushes this custody battle, we'll be ready," he said with newfound determination. That evening, Carol sat quietly in the living room. The setting sun painted the walls in warm amber tones as she reflected on the day's events. A soft whine caught her attention, and she looked down to see Max approaching. Slowly, cautiously, he moved closer, until finally, he rested his head on her lap. Carol's breath caught in her throat as tears welled in her eyes. The weight of his trust felt like the first real step toward healing, for both of them. Carol sat at her kitchen table, morning light streaming through the window and casting warm shadows across the worn wooden surface. In her hands, she held the gold locket her late husband had given her on their 20th anniversary, its familiar weight both comforting and painful. Her thumb traced the delicate engraving, "Love Eternal, Tom." Inside were two small photos, one from their wedding day, her in white lace and him beaming with joy, another from their last vacation together in the mountains, both of them silver-haired, but still so in love. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and carefully placed the locket in her purse, the soft click of the clasp echoing in the quiet room. The drive to Anderson's jewelry felt longer than usual, each familiar landmark stirring memories she tried to push aside. The little bell above the door chimed as she entered, filling the air with its cheerful tinkle. "Mrs. Green," Mr. Anderson greeted her warmly from behind the gleaming glass counter. "What brings you in today?" Carol's voice wavered slightly as she placed the locket on the counter, her fingers lingering on the smooth surface before letting go. "I need to sell this, David." Mr. Anderson examined the piece carefully, opening it to check the photos inside. His eyes softened with understanding, crow's feet deepening at the corners. "This is the one Tom gave you, isn't it?" Carol nodded, unable to speak for a moment, her throat tight with emotion. It's excellent craftsmanship, 14-karat gold, he said gently, holding it up to catch the light. After appraising it, he offered her a price that made her eyes widen, more than she'd expected. "Are you sure about this, Carol?" he asked kindly, his weathered hand still cradling the locket. "Yes," she said firmly, though. The front door slammed open, making Max jump. Vanessa stormed into Ryan's living room, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Her face was flushed with anger. "How dare you prepare a case against me?" she shouted, waving a folder of papers. "My lawyer just told me what you're doing." Ryan stood his ground, though his hands trembled slightly. "I'm protecting my son." "Protecting him? By keeping that unstable dog? By letting some stranger get involved?" Vanessa's voice grew louder. "This is completely irresponsible, Ryan." Down the hallway, Eli's bedroom door creaked as he pressed closer to listen. Max's ears twitched at the sound. "You can barely pay your bills," Vanessa continued. "And instead of selling that dog for good money, you're being selfish. What kind of father puts a dog before his child's future?" The front door opened again, and Carol stepped in. She took in the scene, Ryan's pale face, Vanessa's aggressive stance, and the fear radiating from down the hall, where Eli hid. "That's enough," Carol said firmly, moving to stand beside Ryan. "Max isn't just a dog. He's essential to Eli's emotional well-being." Vanessa spun toward her. "You need to stay out of this. You have no right to interfere in my family's affairs." "I have every right to speak up for what's best for Eli," Carol replied calmly. "And I've seen firsthand how Max helps him cope with his anxiety. Ryan is an excellent father who puts his son first every single day." "You don't know anything about," Vanessa started, but Ryan cut her off. "No, Vanessa, Carol's right." His voice grew stronger. "I'm done letting you bully us. I'm going to fight for Eli, and I'm going to fight to keep Max. We have documentation from Eli's therapist, from his teachers, all showing how much Max helps him." Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, momentarily speechless at Ryan's newfound confidence. "This isn't over," she finally spat, grabbing her purse. "Not by a long shot." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Max padded over to Ryan and pressed his nose against Ryan's palm. Ryan scratched behind the dog's ears, drawing strength from the simple gesture. "We've got solid evidence, Ryan," Carol assured him. "And more importantly, we've got the truth on our side." Carol watched the morning sun glint off the market stalls as she walked beside Ryan and Max. The downtown farmers market buzzed with activity, vendors calling out their wares, shoppers chatting, and the clatter of setup still underway. "Are you sure about this?" Ryan asked, gripping Max's leash tightly. "It's pretty busy today." "He needs to face his fears," Carol said softly, "and I'll be right here with him." They made their way down the first row of stalls. Max's body was rigid, his ears pressed flat against his head. Every few steps he would pause, scanning the crowd nervously. "That's it, boy," Carol murmured, using the same steady tone she'd used during their military days. "Nice and easy." The smells of fresh bread and flowers filled the air as they passed different vendors. Max's nose twitched, but his muscles remained tense. Eli walked a few steps behind, watching anxiously. Suddenly, a loud crash rang out. A vendor had dropped a metal serving tray, sending it clattering across the pavement. Max froze, his whole body trembling. But instead of bolting or hiding, he turned his head toward Carol. Their eyes met, and she immediately crouched down. "It's okay, Max," she said calmly, her voice carrying the same authority and comfort it had in Afghanistan. "You're safe. I'm here." To everyone's amazement, Max's trembling slowly subsided. He took one hesitant step toward Carol, then another until he was close enough for her to feel his warm breath. "Dad, look!" Eli exclaimed, rushing over. He wrapped his arms around Max's neck, and the dog's tail gave a small wag. "He's not scared anymore." Ryan shook his head in disbelief. "I never thought, usually when he hears loud noises." "He's remembering who he used to be," Carol said, gently scratching behind Mac's ears. "And he's learning to trust again." As they headed toward the market exit, Ryan turned to Carol. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I honestly never thought Max could make this kind of progress." Carol smiled, her heart full as she watched Max walking more confidently beside them, his ears now perked forward with interest rather than pinned back in fear. Ryan's hands trembled as he stared at his phone. The number on the screen, the buyer's latest offer, seemed to glow like a beacon of hope. It was enough to cover Eli's medical expenses for years, with plenty left over for a stable future. Carol knocked softly before entering the living room, finding Ryan pacing back and forth. Max watched from his bed in the corner, his ears twitching with concern. "Ryan? What's wrong?" Carol asked, noticing his distress. "They called again," Ryan said, running a hand through his hair. "The offer. It's more than I ever imagined. Enough to give Eli everything he needs, the best doctors, treatments, everything." Carol sat down on the couch, patting the space next to her. Ryan sank down, his shoulders heavy. "I know you want what's best for Eli," she said gently. "But think about how far Max has come. Remember the market yesterday? He's healing, Ryan. And more importantly, he's helping Eli heal too." "But the money," Ryan started. "Money can fix some problems," Carol said. "But losing Max, that would leave a wound that no amount of money could heal." The soft patting of feet made them both look up. Eli stood in the doorway, his pajamas rumpled and his eyes wide with understanding. "Dad?" His voice quivered. "Are you thinking about selling Max?" Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came out. "Please don't," Eli whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. "He's more than just a dog. He's my best friend." Max rose from his bed and padded over to Eli, pressing against his leg. The boy's small hand found the dog's fur, gripping it like a lifeline. Ryan watched them for a long moment, then picked up his phone. His fingers moved swiftly across the screen, dialing the buyer's number. "Hello," he said firmly. "I appreciate your offer, but Max isn't for sale. He's family." As he ended the call, Carol squeezed his shoulder supportively. Max settled at Ryan's feet, his presence a quiet affirmation of their unbreakable bond. The courthouse loomed gray and imposing against the cloudy morning sky. Ryan adjusted his tie with shaking hands as Carol gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Remember why we're here," she said softly. "For Eli and Max." Ryan nodded, watching Eli grip Max's leash tightly. The German shepherd sat perfectly still, his alert eyes scanning the courthouse steps. Despite the tension in the air, Max remained a steady presence. Inside the courtroom, Vanessa sat with her lawyer, her expression confident and composed. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Ryan's heart pounded as the proceedings began. Vanessa's lawyer spoke first, his voice sharp and accusatory. "Mr. Hale's financial instability is well documented. He even considered selling his son's therapy dog for money, hardly the action of a responsible parent." Ryan clenched his jaw, but Carol's reassuring presence helped him stay calm. His own lawyer presented next, sharing documentation from Eli's therapist about Max's crucial role in managing the boy's anxiety. When Carol took the stand, her voice carried the weight of both professional experience and personal conviction. "As a retired nurse who's worked with trauma patients, I can attest to the profound impact therapy animals have on emotional healing. The bond between Eli and Max is extraordinary. Breaking it would cause significant harm to Eli's progress." The courtroom fell silent when Eli stepped up to speak. His small fingers twisted together nervously, but his voice remained clear. "Max helps me be brave," he said simply. "When I'm scared at night, or when the storms are really loud, he stays with me. He makes everything okay." Eli's eyes filled with tears. "Please don't take him away." Even Vanessa's composed expression cracked, her eyes softening as she watched her son speak about his beloved dog. When the judge announced they would issue a decision within days, Ryan knelt outside the courtroom and pulled Eli into a tight hug. "No matter what happens, we're in this together, buddy." Max pressed against them both, his steady presence a reminder of everything they were fighting to protect. The days after the hearing crawled by like molasses. Ryan found himself fixing every squeaky door hinge and loose cabinet handle in the house. Anything to keep his hands busy and his mind off the pending decision. In the backyard, Eli spent hours in his tent with Max, reading quietly or just holding on to the dog's thick fur. Carol stopped by each day, bringing coffee for Ryan and small treats for Max. Her steady presence helped anchor them during the uncertainty. "You both look like you could use a change of scenery," Carol said one sunny afternoon, watching Eli absently stroke Max's head. "There's a beautiful lake just outside town. What do you say we pack some sandwiches and get out of here for a bit?" Ryan hesitated, but seeing the spark of interest in Eli's eyes made him nod. "That sounds good, actually." The lake welcomed them with gentle waves lapping at a sandy shore. Pine trees swayed in the breeze, their branches casting dancing shadows on the water. Eli's shoulders relaxed as he threw a stick for Max, who bounded into the shallow water after it. "I haven't heard him laugh like that in days," Ryan said softly, watching his son giggle as Max shook water everywhere. They settled on a blanket Carol had brought, watching Eli and Max play near the water's edge. After a while, Carol's eyes grew distant. "You know, that night in Afghanistan," she began, her voice quiet. "We were under heavy fire. I had to make a split-second decision to evacuate with the wounded soldiers. Leaving Max behind was..." She swallowed hard. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done." Ryan listened intently as Carol described the chaos of that night, the weight of responsibility, and the guilt that followed her home. "Being here now, helping Max heal, it feels like a gift I don't deserve," she admitted. "But I'm so grateful for this second chance." The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the lake in warm golden light. Max padded over and settled at Carol's feet, his brown eyes meeting hers with quiet trust. "Carol," Ryan said softly, "thank you for everything you've done for us." Ryan's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. His lawyer's name flashed on the screen, making his heart skip a beat. Carol reached over and squeezed his shoulder as he answered. "The court's decision just came through. I'm sending you the email now," his lawyer said. Ryan's hands trembled as he opened his laptop. Eli pressed close to his side, and Max sat alert at their feet. The email loaded, and Ryan's eyes scanned the document, his breath caught in his throat. Suddenly, his face broke into a wide smile. "We won," he whispered, then louder. "We won! Full custody, and the judge specifically mentioned Max's importance to your well-being, buddy." Eli launched himself into Ryan's arms with a joyful cry. "We get to keep Max, really?" "Really," Ryan confirmed, hugging his son tight. Max barked excitedly, tail wagging as he circled them. Carol dabbed at her eyes with her sleeve, watching the family celebrate. "I knew you could do it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Later that evening, headlights swept across the living room windows as Vanessa's car pulled into the driveway. Ryan tensed slightly, but went to meet her at the door. She looked tired, her usual sharp appearance somewhat subdued. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. Inside, Vanessa sat stiffly on the edge of the couch. "I'm not happy about the decision," she began, then paused, watching Eli and Max through the window. But seeing Eli in court, hearing him talk about Max, I realize I might have been wrong about some things. She turned to Ryan. I won't fight this anymore. Eli needs stability, and clearly Max is part of that. I'll work with you on visitation. Do things properly this time. After Vanessa left, Ryan and Carol settled on the porch steps. The sunset painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks as Eli threw a ball for Max in the yard. We couldn't have done this without you, Ryan said quietly to Carol. She smiled, watching Max bound back to Eli with the ball, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over her heart. The morning sun cast long shadows across the park as families gathered for the community's therapy animal celebration. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and the excited chatter of children filled the air. Ryan stood near the small stage, adjusting his collar nervously, while Eli beamed beside him, one hand firmly holding Max's leash. Carol found a quiet spot at the edge of the crowd, watching as Ryan stepped up to the microphone. Max sat calmly at Eli's feet, his therapy vest gleaming in the sunlight. The sight filled her with quiet pride. How far they'd all come from that first encounter at the Veterans Day Parade. Good morning, everyone, Ryan began, his voice steady and warm. A few months ago, I nearly lost something precious. Not just my therapy dog, Max, but my family's heart. He glanced down at Eli, who smiled back. But sometimes help comes from unexpected places. Ryan's eyes found Carol in the crowd. There's someone special here today who changed everything for us. Carol Green not only helped Max overcome his past trauma, but showed us what it means to fight for family. He gestured toward her. Carol, would you please join us? Surprised, Carol hesitated before making her way to the stage. The audience applauded as she took the microphone, her hand slightly shaking. Max and I served together in Afghanistan, she said, looking down at the German Shepherd. I remember one night during a particularly difficult mission, Max stayed by an injured soldier's side for hours, keeping him calm until help arrived. She paused, meeting Eli's eyes. That same bravery and devotion lives in him today, helping Eli face his own challenges. After the speech, as families mingled and children petted the therapy animals, Ryan pulled Carol aside near a quiet corner of the park. I can never thank you enough, he said softly. You didn't just help Max, you saved our family. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning and shared understanding. Max lay peacefully at Carol's feet, while Eli played with some other children nearby. Ryan watched them for a moment before turning back to Carol. Would you consider continuing to work with Max? He asked. Help other families like ours? Carol smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest as she looked down at Max. Carol sat in her living room, sunlight streaming through the windows as she turned the pages of her old photo album. Her fingers traced the edges of a photograph showing Max in his military gear, his younger self standing alert and proud beside their unit. The image brought back a flood of memories, both painful and precious. The sharp ring of her phone broke through her reverie. Ryan's name flashed on the screen. Carol? I was wondering if you'd like to join us at the therapy center today, Ryan said. Max has a session with some new kids, and Eli's really excited to show you how far they've come. At the center, Carol watched from a corner as Max moved gracefully between the children. His confidence amazed her. No trace remained of the anxious, traumatized dog she'd first encountered months ago. Eli stood in the middle of the group, his voice clear and steady as he demonstrated commands to the other children. This is how Max knows to stay close when someone's scared, Eli explained, showing a hand signal. The other kids listened intently, their eyes wide with admiration. Ryan touched Carol's elbow gently, guiding her to a quiet spot near the window. The program director pulled me aside earlier, he said, his voice filled with enthusiasm. They want to expand Mac's work into something bigger, a community outreach program for veterans and kids dealing with trauma. They think your background would make you perfect to help lead it. Carol hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. I don't know, Ryan. It's been so long since I've worked in any official capacity. Just watch them, Ryan said softly, gesturing toward Max and the children. Carol observed as Max gently nuzzled a shy little girl's hand, encouraging her to join the group. The girl's face lit up with a tentative smile. You're right, Carol said, straightening her shoulders. This could be good, for all of us. As the session came to an end, Max padded over to where Carol stood. He sat beside her, pressing his nose against her palm in a familiar gesture. Carol ran her fingers through his fur, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. In that moment, she felt something shift inside her, a sense of coming full circle, of wounds finally beginning to heal. The Veterans Center buzzed with activity as Carol arranged chairs in neat rows. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed information packets on each seat. Across the room, Ryan and Eli worked together to set up a refreshment table, while Max watched them with alert interest. You okay? Ryan asked, noticing Carol's nervousness. Just want everything to be perfect, she replied, smoothing her blouse. People began filing in, veterans with weathered faces and children clutching their parents' hands. Carol's heart swelled as she watched Max greet each newcomer with gentle curiosity. When everyone was seated, Ryan stepped up to the podium. Thank you all for coming, he said warmly. I'd like to introduce someone very special, Carol Green, who served as a war nurse and has an incredible story to share about our therapy dog, Max. Carol took a deep breath and approached the microphone. During my time in Afghanistan, Max wasn't just a military dog. He was hope with 4 legs, she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. He stayed by my side through firefights and long nights of treating the wounded. When I had to leave him behind, it broke something in both of us. But life has a way of coming full circle. As she spoke about Max's journey from war dog to therapy animal, heads nodded in understanding. She described his transformation from a traumatized animal to a source of healing for Eli and others. After her speech, a line formed of people wanting to share their stories. A veteran with trembling hands knelt beside Max, tears in his eyes. I haven't slept through the night in years, he confessed quietly. Seeing what Max has overcome, maybe there's hope for me too. Max pressed against the man's leg, offering silent comfort. Carol watched as the veteran's shoulders relaxed, his hand steady as he stroked Max's fur. Across the room, Eli proudly demonstrated to other children how Max responded to gentle commands. The dog moved between groups with confidence, somehow knowing exactly who needed him most. As the crowd began to thin, Carol found a quiet spot to sit, Max settling beside her. She watched Eli playing with some children who had lingered, their laughter filling the room. Ryan joined them, lowering himself into a nearby chair. Look at him, Carol said softly, nodding toward Max. Who would have thought that scared dog from the park would be helping so many people? We're just getting started, Ryan replied, his voice full of quiet determination. The weeks flew by as Carol settled into her new routine with the outreach program. Each session brought new faces and stories, while familiar ones returned regularly. She watched with pride as Max confidently navigated the community center, his presence bringing comfort to veterans and children alike. Look how far he's come, Ryan said one afternoon, as Max calmly demonstrated commands for a group of children, despite the clatter of chairs being moved nearby. Carol nodded, remembering how Max used to tremble at such noises. He's teaching me as much as I'm teaching others, she replied softly. During their 4th session, Carol noticed a man sitting alone in the corner, his eyes fixed on the floor. She recognized that look. She'd seen it in her own mirror countless times. Quietly, she made her way over and sat beside him. "Sometimes just being here is the hardest part," she said gently. The man glanced up briefly. "Everyone seems to have it together," he muttered. "I shouldn't be here." "I felt the same way for a long time," Carol shared. "The guilt of leaving Max behind, it ate at me for years. I thought I didn't deserve forgiveness." Her honesty seemed to surprise him. "How did you move past it?" "By realizing that healing isn't about deserving, it's about accepting help when it's offered." As if on cue, Max padded over and settled his head on the veteran's knee. The man's hand trembled as he reached out to stroke Max's fur. Slowly, his shoulders relaxed and words began to flow. Ryan watched from across the room as Carol listened to the veteran's story. Later, as they cleaned up after the session, he touched her arm gently. "You know, Carol, what you're doing here, it's not just about Max anymore. These people connect with you. You're helping them find their voice." Carol felt warmth spread through her chest as she watched Eli helping Max demonstrate simple commands to a young girl. The boy had grown more confident over the weeks, proud to share his knowledge with others. That evening, Carol walked home through the quiet streets, reflecting on how much had changed. Max's journey from a traumatized war dog to a confident therapy animal mirrored her own path. Through helping others face their struggles, she had finally begun to heal her own wounds. The gentle autumn breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves, and Carol felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She had found more than just redemption with Max. She had found a new purpose, and with Ryan and Eli, a sense of belonging she thought she'd lost forever. The crisp autumn air carried the sound of distant marching bands as Carol stood in front of her mirror adjusting her veteran's cap. Her hands trembled slightly as she rehearsed her speech one last time. The invitation to speak at the Veterans Day parade had caught her by surprise. It felt like yesterday that she'd spotted Max there, though nearly a year had passed. A knock at her door announced Ryan and Eli's arrival. Max bounded in first, his tail wagging with excitement. "Ready for the big day?" Ryan asked, smiling warmly. "As ready as I'll ever be," Carol replied, taking a deep breath. At the parade grounds, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. American flags fluttered in the breeze as families gathered along Main Street. Carol took her place at the podium, with Ryan, Eli, and Max standing proudly beside her. "A year ago, I stood right there," she began, pointing to the sidewalk, "feeling lost and alone. Then I saw a German shepherd who changed everything." Her voice grew stronger as she shared their story, from the battlefields of Afghanistan to their unexpected reunion and journey of healing. "Max saved my life overseas," Carol continued, her voice thick with emotion. "But what amazes me most is how he continues to save lives today. Through his work as a therapy dog, he shows us that even our deepest wounds can heal with time, patience, and love." The crowd listened intently as Carol described their outreach program and the veterans and children whose lives Max had touched. When she spoke about second chances and resilience, Max let out a soft bark, drawing chuckles from the audience. "Sometimes the greatest acts of heroism," she concluded, "aren't the dramatic rescues on the battlefield, but the quiet moments when we choose to trust again, to heal, and to help others do the same." The applause was thunderous. Eli beamed with pride, and Ryan squeezed Carol's shoulder supportively. Max stood tall beside them, his posture reflecting the confident, healing presence he'd become. As the parade concluded, Carol knelt beside Max, giving him a gentle scratch behind his ears. He nuzzled her hand affectionately, his trust complete and unwavering. Ryan's hand found her shoulder, and Eli's laughter rang out as Max playfully nudged him. Carol smiled, feeling whole again. If you enjoyed the story of Ryan, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.